Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the Harborne Islamic Study Circle HISC Seerah session 233. So last week what we covered was session 43, where we talked about the Prophet wrestling with Ruqana, throwing him onto the ground 3 times, and then Ruqana becoming a Muslim. And then we talked about how the Quraysh sent some senior delegation to negotiate with the Prophet. Utbah ibn Abiyah, he came and talked with the Prophet who rejected all the proposals. And then Utbah went back to the Quraysh and basically said, you need to accept him as a prophet, and he will have rule over the Arabs, and it's a win-win for them. But the Quraysh rejected that. Session 44, again, we talked about some of the other final negotiations, and we recapped on them offering, wealth, king, becoming a king, etc., etc. And the Prophet ﷺ was uncompromising and did not settle for anything other than absolute submission. Again, that led to frustration amongst the Quraysh. They then did an unprecedented event in the history of the Arab nation. Until then, they actually boycotted their own tribespeople. So they instituted a boycott for Banu Hashim because Abu Talib did not accept the conditions of handing Prophet ﷺ over for execution, and so they essentially self-exiled themselves into the valley, and they were there for 3 years, and it was a very difficult situation for the Quraysh because of that. Then we also talked about how the boycott was ended. There was Hisham meeting around a few other like-minded people, and they all then conspired a plot to cancel the agreement. And the Prophet ﷺ, told Abu Talib that the actual written document had been eaten by ants, and Abu Talib then challenged the Quraysh, and that's exactly what they found when they opened up the Kaaba. And so the boycott was cancelled, and then there was a sort of a reconciliation between both parties that they wouldn't bring up the past around the boycott and the exile. Then we talked about the death of Abu Talib and how he died on his deathbed without becoming a Muslim, much to the frustration and annoyance of the Prophet ﷺ, because they both loved each other deeply. And then we also talked about the death of Khadija, one of the 4 greatest women ever, and the impact of that on the Prophet ﷺ, and this led to the year of grief. So moving now on to the next session, session 48. It's actually the start of the final phase of the dawah. And this is where Allah had mentioned to the Prophet ﷺ that it became sort of compulsory on him to seek the support of any and every other Arab tribe to try to establish the Islamic rule somewhere outside of Mecca. Tried for over 10 years, hasn't worked out for the people of Mecca, so he's been forced to approach all the other tribes, and then during the Hajj season or at any other opportunity, he would try to meet with the elders of each of the tribes. And so this final phase of the dawah is known as the Nusrah, seeking support stage. And the Prophet ﷺ, he thought that actually the first place to start would be to try and approach the rival city to Mecca. And that rival city is the city of Taif. And so the Prophet ﷺ went sort of surreptitiously. He took Zaid with him, didn't pack up a camel, and they went on foot for a few days walking to get to Taif, which is, as I said, the rival twin city of Mecca. And the Prophet ﷺ, he traveled light with Zayd. They get there, and then they request an audience with the 3 conjoint leaders of Taif. These are 3 brothers that were put in tripartite control of Taif upon the death of their father. And they listen to the Prophet ﷺ, and then they each in turn give their response to the Prophet ﷺ. And so one of the brothers said he would rather tear down the cloth of the Kaaba than accept the fact that the Prophet ﷺ has been chosen as a prophet. And so he rejected the offer from the Prophet ﷺ. The next brother said, look, he just didn't believe the Prophet ﷺ. And then the third brother said that either the Prophet ﷺ is, if he is genuinely a prophet, then he is too good a person for this brother to talk to, and so he's not going to talk to him. And if the Prophet ﷺ is actually not a prophet, then he is a liar, in which case he is too beneath this brother for him to talk to. So either way, he's not going to talk to him. And so they rejected the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ then asked for confidentiality around this meeting, and that the news doesn't spread to the Quraysh. They agreed, and then he also asked for permission to talk to other people in Taif, to go to the streets and the markets and to discuss Islam. And again, they saw no harm in that, and so they allowed the Prophet ﷺ to go and preach openly in Taif. But he did not have the support or backing of the leadership or the elders of Banu Thaqif, the people of Taif. So the Prophet ﷺ, he then goes and does dawah in the city and actually starts to cause a commotion in as far as people started listening. He was getting an audience, and so some of the other nobles and the elite were starting to get a bit agitated, because here the Prophet ﷺ is gaining some traction. And so he was there probably for a few days. And so some of the elite, they're getting very upset. And so they get some of the ruffians, the youth, the Asbo type of people to gang together and start stoning the Prophet ﷺ, and they chased him out of Taif. And it was such a vicious attack on the Prophet ﷺ that these guys they're chasing him, they're throwing stones and everything at the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ is being shielded by Zaid, and they're scarpering out of Taif, and they run and run and run and being chased and chased and chased. And it said that the Prophet ﷺ was in such a state of shock that by the time he escaped the mob, he was about 4 or 5 kilometers outside of Taif, so running for at least for half an hour, being chased by these people. And here the Prophet then later on admits that actually this point in time is the lowest ebb in his dawah. This is the darkest day, as it were, more painful to him than actually what happened to him at the Battle of Uhud. And we know this because Aisha, she asked him later on in life about his darkest moments. And this, he said, without a doubt, was his lowest point in his dawah. He was completely in shock, the way he's been treated. This is the year of grief, and he's basically, being cast out, and he doesn't know where to turn. And so in this sense of despair, the Prophet ﷺ then, as all prophets do, he turns to Allah and asks Allah for prayer, for support and guidance. It's a lovely dua that the Prophet ﷺ makes, and basically saying, look, I don't know if you're angry with me, what I've done wrong, but can you please make things easy for me? And he asks Allah for support. And what we do know is that when Allah tests people, when there is hardship, He follows up that hardship with ease. And the ratio is, for every hardship, there are 2 eases. And so the scholars say that the 2 immediate eases here was the blessings of the night of Jinn, where the Prophet ﷺ then encounters the Jinn and realizes that even if his message isn't going to gain traction amongst his own people, at least the Jinn will benefit from it. And then there's the scholars say then there was the Isra wal Miraj, which again was like a gift to the Prophet ﷺ from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That was the ease following this intense hardship from the Prophet ﷺ. And we briefly talked about the Prophet ﷺ's interaction with Addas the slave from Nineveh, but we'll come on to that in the next session. So then session 49 was part 2 of Taif and the night of Jinn. So we sort of went in more detail of the dua that the Prophet ﷺ made to Allah after being chased out of Taif, and the sincere the sentiment in the dua was that Prophet ﷺ, he hopes that Allah is not angry with him, and because he feels he's failed in his mission in Mecca, he's failed in his mission in Taif. He gets a sense that maybe Allah is angry with him, and so he asks Allah, to strengthen him and to make things easy for him. Immediately after the dua, we find that the Prophet he's sort of leaning there. He's recognized by a couple of people from Mecca, and they then send their slave Addas with some grapes for Zaid and for the Prophet. So Addas we've come across before because he is the Christian slave that it's said that when revelation first came to the Prophet, he went back to Khadija. Khadija then went to Addas and asked Addas, what's this about? And Addas says, look, I'm not quite sure. This might be revelation, but you're best off talking to Waraka bin Nawfal. This is the same Addas. So Addas then presents these grapes to the Prophet, and he said, my masters have asked me to give you these dates. And the Prophet, he takes the dates, and before eating, he says, Bismillah. And whereby Addas says, what have you just said? And the Prophet says, Bismillah. And goes, well, you're obviously not from around here. Why do you say that? So the Prophet then has a short conversation with Addas, realizes that Addas is from Nineveh, which is the town of Yunus, Matta, Jonah, and the whale. And they have this conversation, and the Prophet says, I'm a prophet, just like Yunus was. And then Addas, he becomes a Muslim. He falls down at the feet of the Prophet, starts kissing the hands and the feet of the Prophet. And then obviously he gets beckoned back by his slave masters and said, what's this all about? We sent you there with some grapes and you're kissing his feet. And then he goes, look, he's told me things that only a prophet would know. Then we find that Jibril, he arrives with the angel of the mountains to the Prophet and basically says, look, I'm here with the angel of the mountains. If you want, I can crush the people of Taif under the mountains. Just say the word and it'll happen. And the Prophet says, no, I don't want that for the people, because perhaps, amongst their children or the children's children will be some Muslims. So he resists the temptation of punishing the people of Taif, despite the way he was treated. Then he's going back from there to Mecca, and on the way there one evening, he's praying tahajjud at night. And again, whilst he's praying tahajjud, he's in the desert, it's quiet, it's peaceful, and he is overheard by a passing group of Jinn, who then sort of astounded with this revelation, the Qur'an, when they hear it, and they're mesmerized, and then they sit and talk to the Prophet. So they have a one-on-one session, a halaqah with the Prophet, who explains to them about Islam, the Qur'an, etc., and they are mesmerized, and they get other jinn and say, look, we haven't heard anything like this since the time of Musa. And so, and then later on in that session, in the study circle, we talked about the interaction between jinn and humankind, and how there was a time where they interacted closely, but then when the Prophet was born, something happened, and when revelation started, something happened, and now we know that after the Prophet's death, there is no proper interaction between jinn kind and mankind, except for the whispering, the waswasa that the jinn do to the humans. And so we talked about the sort of the reductionist views around the interaction between jinn and mankind. Session 50 is a beautiful session. It was a session where we started the study circle from its sort of new venue, its proper venue, as it were, here, following sort of doing it in a different place for a long time. And this was after we returned back from the Hajj. And we talked briefly about our experiences in the Hajj and what a beautiful experience it was, and how the things that we learned from the Hajj. So again, session 50 was a wonderful session for us. And then to put things into context of the Isra wal Miraj, we did a very brief recap of the Seerah from the beginning to now, just to set the scene around the Isra wal Miraj. So we talked about how Qusay, he overthrew Jurham, and the Quraysh returned to Mecca. And then we talked about the virtues of Hisham, the virtues of Abdul Muttalib, the year of the elephant, and Abraha, the birth of the Prophet ﷺ in the year of the elephant. The Prophet ﷺ is born, he becomes an orphan, and then Amna sends the Prophet ﷺ to the foster nurse, Halima. They live in the desert for a few years, and then Halima notices miracles associated with the Prophet ﷺ, and then later on, when the Prophet ﷺ has his chest opened by Jibril and his heart washed, she panics, brings the Prophet ﷺ back, and then he stays with Amna. She then passes away. He goes stays with Abdul Muttalib. He passes away, passes on to Abu Talib, and then he grows up in that sort of orphan environment, very poor, becomes a shepherd, and then because of his trustworthiness, he receives the proposal to go on a business trip to Syria on behalf of Khadija. Very successful. Then the proposal from Khadija for marriage comes, and then they start a family together. We also talked about how the Kaaba was structurally affected by a flood, and then later a fire, causes the Kaaba to essentially be unsound, and it needs to be rebuilt. There was a ship that got shipwrecked, and the Quraysh then raised money, rebuilt the Kaaba. Prophet put the black stone back. Then later on, he's trying to find the purpose of life. He's meditating in the cave. Jibril appears to him with the first revelation, Iqra. He's stunned. He runs back to Khadija. He says, "Cover me up." She then consults Warqa bin Nawfal. What's this all about? He says, look, he's going to be chased out of town because he's a prophet. If only I was alive until then. Then we talked about the private stage of Islam, where the process is culturing a small group of followers, hand-picked people to learn about Islam in this private stage with the sort of these converts. Then the Prophet is ordered to go into a public stage of dawah, invites the families around for dinner, then goes on to Mount Safa and proclaims Islam. And there's immediate backlash by the ruling elite, who start a coordinated campaign of misinformation, of ridicule, of lies, of slander against the Prophet ﷺ. They challenge him for miracles, they challenge him for punishment, and the Prophet ﷺ, by the permission of Allah, actually performs the splitting of the moon to no avail for the doubters. The haters going to hate, and they see the Prophet ﷺ's message as causing social chaos, and it's a direct challenge to their societal values and the societal beliefs that they have. So they try negotiating with his uncle first, knowing the social hierarchy. Then they start to attempts at bribing the Prophet ﷺ. But the Prophet ﷺ, he's uncompromising around the beliefs of Islam. Then they start to torture and persecute the Muslims. So the Prophet ﷺ, he sent the group of Muslims, they dispatched to Abyssinia, the first lot, and then the second lot. They stay in Abyssinia. Then we have the two critical noble people becoming Muslim, Hamza and then Umar. This leads to an even increased panic amongst the Quraysh and the ruling elite, and they then resort to a 3-year boycott and exile of Banu Hashim. When that exile and boycott is ended, both Abu Talib and Khadija pass away, and these are the people that gave comfort and support to the Prophet ﷺ. This leads to immense grief. He becomes depressed, the year of sorrow, and the Prophet ﷺ is then ordered to seek alternative bases for Islam, and so he decides to go to Taif first. He goes to Taif, meets the leaders, gets chased out of Taif, and then he feels he's running out of options, becomes exhausted, and asks Allah for help. And at this point, Allah then elevates him to the heavens through the night journey, meets the prophets, and we see that after this point in time, the demeanor of the Prophet ﷺ, it changes instantly. You know, he has confidence. He changes the way in which he does dawah. He recognizes the mission in its totality and how it fits in with the history of humanity, and then he becomes ready to tackle everything. So then we move on to Al-Isra wal-Miraj, and so the Prophet when he returns from Taif to enter Mecca, he needs to have official tribal protection in order to re-enter Mecca. So he asks Al-Akhnas, who says no. He asks Suhail bin Amr, they say no. And then he approaches Mu'tim ibn Adi, who agrees because of his nobility and his character to protect the Prophet ﷺ. And he does it publicly by surrounding the Prophet ﷺ with his sons, and they do tawaf, and he says, I am now giving the Prophet ﷺ official protection. Abu Sufyan says, have you become Muslim? He says, no, I'm just protecting him. And Abu Sufyan says, okay, fine, we'll accept that protection. And this is the same Mu'tim ibn Adi, who, despite being a non-Muslim, is of a high pedigree. He tried to stop the Battle of Badr. He was one of the signatories of Hilf al-Fudul. He's well respected, and he would often fill up a camel with food during the boycott, put it on the top of the valley, and then shoo the camel into the valley so the Muslims don't starve to death. And this is the same Mu'tim ibn Adi that the Prophet said when he took the prisoners of war after the Battle of Badr, if Mu'tim wanted these prisoners of war to be freed, I would free them without ransom if he just asked for it. Then we gave an overview in this session 51 of the night journey, where the Jibril takes the Prophet from home to the Hatim, washes his heart. Then via Al-Buraq, they travel to Jerusalem. The Prophet leads the prayer. He then ascends to the heavens and has an audience with Allah. We discussed the difference between the words heavens and paradise, the samawat and Jannah. In English, they're often sort of interchangeable, but in Arabic, there's the difference between the samawat, the levels of heaven, and Jannah in paradise. And we talked about how the samawat, the heavens, are differentiated. There are levels between the different heavens, and the Prophet describes it like the difference between level 1 and level 2 is like the difference between a ring in a desert or a ring in a big shield. When the Prophet goes to the different levels of the heavens, he has a different welcoming party at each level. He knocks on the door, he gains entry, and he's met with a delegation of angels, and a prophet welcomes him. Level 1, the first heaven, he meets Adam. The second heaven, he meets Isa and Yahya. The third level, he meets Yusuf, alayhi salam. Level 4, he meets Idris. Level 5, Harun. Level 6, Musa. Level 7, Ibrahim. And Ibrahim is also sitting with his back on Bayt al-Ma'mur. And the Prophet after the seventh heaven goes beyond the furthest lote tree, Sidratul Muntaha, that has the 4 rivers flowing beneath it, and he approaches the throne of Allah. When he's there, he has the view of Bayt al-Ma'mur. He hears the pen writing as he is waiting for the conversation, and pen writing, and pen obviously the first thing that Allah created, and that's where he receives the instructions for 50 prayers, which then get reduced back down to 5. And then on the way back from his audience, he has a tour, or not a tour, but he sees the punishments of hell, what's going on in hell, and he has a tour, a virtual tour of Jannah before returning to earth. One of the conversations that Ibrahim had with the Prophet ﷺ is that the Jannah is a lovely place, but it's barren. So tell the people to do lots of dhikr so they can grow trees. And so by doing dhikr, we can grow our own trees and forests in Jannah, and we talked about how to do that, and also the recognition on the Day of Judgment of the greatness of the Prophet ﷺ, because of his high station, Maqam al-Mahmud, where all the nations, we talked about this before when we did Heaven and Hell, all the nations are waiting and waiting and waiting for, seems like an eternity, for the judgment day to start. They approach Adam, and Adam says, no, not me, nafsi, nafsi. Go to Noah. They go to Nuh. He says, no, nafsi, nafsi. Go to Ibrahim. Ibrahim says, no, nafsi, nafsi. Go to Musa. Musa then redirects him to Isa, and Isa redirects the whole of humanity to the Prophet ﷺ to start the proceedings and for intercession. And so there's a recognition of the greatness of the Prophet ﷺ. So all this is tied up in the night journey. It's going to take 7 or 8 sessions to go through, so it was just an overview. So session 52, we talked about the start of the night journey. So the night journey, it did happen. It's mentioned explicitly in both Surah Isra, obviously Isra, and Surah Al-Najm, the beginning of Surah Al-Najm. So the Prophet, he's asleep, he's woken up by Jibreel, taken out of his bed to the Hatim, the semicircular bit by the Kaaba, and he's there, and Jibreel then opens up the Prophet's chest again, takes out his heart again, washes his heart again in Zamzam. This time there's no black spot. Washes his, places it in a gold bowl, washes it, puts his heart back in the Prophet's chest, closes up the chest. There's a scar later on. And this is to strengthen the Prophet physically, mentally, and spiritually for what he is about to encounter in terms of his journey to Jerusalem and to the heavens. And the Qur'an states that the purpose of the night journey, al-Isra al-Miraj, is to show the Prophet ﷺ the signs of Allah. And the scholars consider this to be a personal gift from Allah to the Prophet ﷺ, partly because of all the recent traumas that he has gone through. And whilst the Prophet ﷺ, it said in one of the narrations, is in the Hatim, Jibreel asked the Prophet ﷺ to choose between a glass of milk and a glass of wine. And that says, choose wisely, for it is for your ummah. And obviously the Prophet ﷺ chooses the glass of milk, and Jibreel says, you have chosen wisely. Thereafter, the Prophet ﷺ is introduced to Al-Buraq, this special transdimensional animal that goes at the speed of lightning almost. That's where it gets its name from. The Prophet ﷺ mounts Buraq, who initially buckles, but is chastised by Jibreel. And then the Prophet ﷺ is taken by Jibreel on Buraq to Jerusalem. And as they're going to Jerusalem, the Prophet ﷺ says, as he passed over, before he got to Jerusalem, he could see Musa in his grave praying to Allah. And then he arrives in Jerusalem, meets Musa there again, but also meets Isa. And he has a ton of questions for Isa alayhi salam. And so he's asking Isa alayhi salam about what's going to happen in the Day of Judgment, etc., signs of the Day of Judgment. When the Prophet he reaches Bayt al-Maqdis in Jerusalem, in Al-Quds, he prays to Nafil, and then he leads a prayer in this trans-dimensional state within the precincts of the Masjid of Sulaiman, Temple of Solomon. All 124,000 prophets that have been sent, all in a straight line, all behind the Prophet ﷺ in prayer. The Prophet ﷺ leads the prayer of all the prophets. Then he is, ushered away by Jibreel, back onto Buraq, and they ascend up into the heavens. And inshallah, we'll continue the Isra al-Miraj journey into the heavens next time. But that was sessions from 48 through to 52. Inshallah, the next sessions we will do the different samawat. We'll do the Miraj. We'll do the discussion about the prayers going from 50 down to 5. We'll talk about the Prophet when he briefly has a sort of the sort of an overview of the punishments in hell. We'll talk about his tour of Jannah, his return back to Al-Quds, and then back to, because Burak is tied up there, his journey back to Mecca, and the incredulity of the people in Mecca as to the night journey, and obviously Abu Bakr, his vouching for the Prophet ﷺ, and then some other stories of other converts. So inshallah, that's going to be for next time. So until then, do remember us and the Ummah in your du'as, and inshallah, hope this has been instructive. So we'll finish there, inshallah. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم.